A recent report says former Governor Matt Bevin sent his son to an abusive school in Jamaica. What we know about that situation. And the search for Kamala Harris's running mate continues, where Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear stands in the race now.
And temperatures today were in the upper 80s and low 90s. How long will this stretch of warm weather last? Details in a few minutes.
Mountain News, first at 4, continues.
Former Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin advocated for child abuse prevention during his time in Frankfort. He and his now ex-wife had 9 children. 4 of them were adopted from Ethiopia. Samantha Valentino tells us about new reports that Bevin sent one of his adopted children to an abusive boarding school in Jamaica.
The London Times reports former Governor Matt Bevin sent one of his adopted children to a facility in Florida in 2019 after losing to Governor Andy Beshear. The child told the outlet he felt Bevin adopted him for, quote, public image. According to the Times, Noah went to Jamaica's Atlantis Leadership Academy last year. In April, 5 of their employees were arrested for child cruelty and assault. They're accused of beating children and forcing them to work out until they vomit. The facility was shut down in February. The Times says Noah's parents did not pick him up, and he's now a ward of the Jamaican state. In 2017, the Bevins told WKYT they opted to adopt their children from another country due to the state of Kentucky's foster care and adoption systems, calling them tough to navigate. The couple hosted a forum asking state leaders to rethink the foster care system, specifically to stop trying to get kids back with their birth parents when the birth parents aren't measuring up.
But I want to challenge you and everybody in the judicial system to rethink why, for example, we bend over backwards too often to restore children back into a situation that is bad for them. I don't care if the person in that home is related to them or not. And we have got to rethink this.
Still ahead tonight at 6, we're taking a look back at WKYT's exclusive interview with Bevin and his now ex-wife about adoption and foster care in Kentucky and their decision to adopt. In Frankfort, Samantha Valentino, WKYT.
The former governor has not returned a request for comment on the situation.
Remember this time last week we were talking about a week's worth of rain chances, and around this time last week was when that flood watch was out. Different story now. All is quiet on live pinpoint Doppler radar, and this is going to get a break for the most part as we go throughout the week. There is a couple days where a stray shower or two is certainly not out of the question. Right now we're seeing temperatures in the upper 80s and low 90s. We're at 88 in Pikeville, 90 in Hazard, 89 Jackson, 90 in Moorhead, Ashland, Irvin, Manchester, Somerset. Checking in with 91 degrees, but you factor in that feels like temperature down to 98 in Manchester. You were at 99 earlier, 93 London, 92 Irvin, 91 Moorhead, 98 in Ashland, 96 up towards Louisville. So when you wake up in the morning, we'll see temperatures in the mid to upper 60s. Will stay mainly clear throughout the evening and overnight hours. The 90s are going to go away somewhere on the 7-day forecast, and we'll talk about when in a few minutes. Steve.
Eric, thanks. Vice President Kamala Harris is on the verge of announcing who she wants to join her on the Democratic ticket for the White House. This comes as a new CBS News poll shows Harris has closed the gap with former President Donald Trump. CBS's Skyler Henry has the latest.
Vice President Kamala Harris left the Naval Observatory Monday afternoon, headed to meetings at the White House. On Sunday, at least 3 running mate finalists were seen arriving at the vice president's home for in-person interviews. Harris is expected to pick one of these 6 men to join her on the Democratic ticket. CBS News has learned she plans to announce her choice Tuesday morning, just in time for a new running mate to join her for a campaign swing through 7 battleground states.
It's an honor to be considered, but regardless of what happens through the process, I'm going to do everything I can to get Kamala Harris elected as President of the United States this November.
A new CBS News poll now shows Harris statistically tied with former President Trump in those battlegrounds, as well as nationally. The poll shows a big jump for Democrats compared to when President Biden was still running. When he dropped out, he had a 5% deficit nationwide.
Well, thank you.
Trump campaigned in the battleground state of Georgia over the weekend with a rally at the same arena where Vice President Harris campaigned a few days earlier.
If Harris wins this election, you will quickly have a Kamala economic crash. You're going to have a crash.
The CBS News poll shows Trump with a lead over Harris when it comes to the economy.
Donald Trump still has a big edge on that, just like he did against Joe Biden.
Trump has been posting about the markets dropping on social media throughout the day, including this one saying simply, Trump cash versus Kamala crash. Skyler Henry, CBS News, the White House.
Again, Harris is expected to announce her pick for VP Tuesday morning, followed by a video before holding a rally in Pennsylvania later in the day. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he put a dead bear cub in New York's Central Park 10 years ago. Kennedy says the young bear had been hit and killed by another driver, so he picked it up and had planned to use it for meat. But after realizing he'd miss a flight, left the bear in the park to make it seem like a biker had hit it. Kennedy told the story to actress Roseanne Barr, saying he feared an upcoming article on the incident would be a, quote, bad story. Footage showed Israeli troops and tanks at a border area with Gaza on Monday as gunshots and explosions could be heard in the background. In Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip, residents said Israeli aerial and tank shelling continued overnight, including areas where the army ordered Palestinians to evacuate their houses, saying they plan to act against militants waging attacks from there. Boeing executives are set to face questions from the National Transportation Safety Board on Tuesday. The airline's senior vice president of quality, Elizabeth Lund, and vice president of supplier quality, Doug Ackerman, are scheduled to appear. According to the agenda, the board is planning to ask about the lack of documentation that led to a plane being diverted to Alaska Airlines without critical bolts in place. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch was the first of 3 justices nominated by President Donald Trump that have established a solid conservative majority on the court. In his new book, Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law, Gorsuch argues that Americans are at risk from an explosion of new laws. CBS's Major Garrett reports.
You have a quote early in the book, and I want to ask you if you believe what the quote says. Do you really believe in hell there will only be law and nothing but law?
Well, I'm not sure I would go quite that far, but many people have.
Justice Neil Gorsuch in Overruled throws the book at the law.
You write that law in America has swallowed up ordinary people, intentionally or unintentionally.
Well, I think all with the best of intentions. I've been a judge now for about 18 years, and I just saw so many cases where ordinary Americans, decent, hardworking Americans, were just trying to make their way in life. They weren't trying to hurt anybody, and yet they were caught up in the legal system in ways they couldn't hardly expect. It's a book of stories about the cases I've seen, that other judges like me have seen. Cases about fishermen in Florida, monks in Louisiana, a magician in Missouri, and their experiences in a world where law has really exploded just in our lifetimes.
Are they victims?
Well, I don't know whether you consider them victims or whether you consider them emblematic of a world in which we just have so much law. Federal crimes have maybe doubled in our lifetime. Nobody knows how many federal crimes there are because it would take years just to read them. We have more people serving life sentences today than we had serving any sentence in 1970 or thereabouts. So that's the world we live in, Major. Why? You know, I'm not a psychologist or a social scientist, but I think some of it has to do with trust. I worry when more and more Americans think that people in the other political party are not just wrong, fine, but are evil. I worry when we are unable to speak to one another and listen to one another.
But in a recent poll, 70% say Gorsuch and the other current justices contribute to that problem, deciding cases on ideology rather than being fair and impartial. On that, Gorsuch dissents, respectfully.
I read the other day that in ideologically divided cases, now I don't know what that means, this last term, that I agreed with Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, and Justice Jackson something like 45% of the time. That's the court I know.
But there are people who will watch this right now and say, I thought I understood what Roe versus Wade meant in our country. I thought I understood what affirmative action in college admissions meant. And this court has told me I didn't understand what those things meant, and I wrongly relied on things that I thought were settled. What would you say to those?
I'd say those are deeply complex legal questions on which reasonable minds can, of course, and do disagree. And then when it comes to Roe versus Wade, for example, what did the court decide? Decided that we, the people, should answer that question, not 9 people sitting in Washington, D.C.
How about affirmative action?
Much the same thing. What did we decide? We decided that all people are created equal, that it's not acceptable in this country to discriminate on the basis of race.
And for those who would say, but I feel something's been ripped away from me, you would say?
I would say that we're taking it back to you. That in a democracy, you're in the driver's seat. You're the sovereign. Those famous 3 first words of the Constitution empower you. Do you really want me deciding everything for you?
And for a woman in a state where she no longer has the rights she once relied on, is that cold comfort?
Gorsuch's new book is out for sale on Amazon tomorrow, but you can pre-order it now. Coming up on First at 4, economic numbers are continuing to fall. We'll hear some advice for investors.
Weather headlines for tonight, hot, hot, hot. You'll see temperatures in the 90s. Some places could see triple-digit heat indices and a smidge of a rain chance. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Stay with us.